Hello and welcome back to the Visionary Chronicles. Appreciate you being with me today as always. And I am Bryan Smeltzer. I spent 30 years in executive leadership at Oakley, Adidas, TaylorMade, K-Swiss, built and sold my own brand to a VC firm. And now I advise CMOs and brand leaders through LiquidMind on building brands that build the future. Today we're talking about the reality distortion. Now, most people, as I do, feel that that term is tagged to Steve Jobs, which it is. And in the Visionary Leader, I actually profile both Steve and who I'm going to talk about today, Henry Ford. So I thought it would be interesting to tag Henry Ford on this one. So we're going to talk about this concept of the reality distortion that many leaders deploy in our industry, but very few have the vision or the wherewithal or the passion or the authentication to actually execute on the reality distortion. They either give up or somebody that convinces them to do otherwise. So this is from the book, The Visionary Leader, The Success Principles of the World's Greatest Visionaries, which is my recent best-selling book I released. And the visionary in this chapter is Henry Ford. How the father of mass production bent reality to build an industry. And I thought one of the greatest quotes of all time came from Henry Ford, and it goes towards this reality distortion. And it is, think you can, think you can't. Either way, you're right. So I think it's just one of the greatest quotes of all time. And this quote is over 100 years old, and it's still one of the most precise descriptions of the reality distortion field ever put on paper. Henry Ford didn't just build cars, he built what we call this new reality, a world where the automobile was not a luxury for the wealthy, but a practical tool for every American family. Engineers told him the 8-cylinder engine couldn't be done, but yet he built it. The market told him there was no demand. Yes, there was demand. Conventional wisdom told him the assembly line was just a fantasy. And Ford famously said as well, if I would have asked my customer what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. So can you imagine if Henry Ford, one of the greatest visionaries of all time, had taken this advice, and it holds true. What I love about this is that it holds true to you today, right? Is that you get people, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't. And many times you bend to that. But there will be leaders that won't. And that's what the reality distortion field is all about. They have a vision of the future that nobody else sees. And as a result of that, they need to bend this reality to have people believe in their vision enough that they continue to pursue something that's in your head. So Ford thought differently, and history was really made as a result of that. So today I thought it would be great to break down how Ford used this reality distortion field, long before the term existed with Steve Jobs, to revolutionize manufacturing, reshape American life as we know it today, and leave a legacy that still defines how industries are built. And this is from chapter 7 of the Visionary Leader. So let's talk about Henry Ford. And the concept of the reality distortion field was devised many decades after Henry Ford's remarkable life. We can look at his achievements as a model of reality distortion applied with a masterful hand. They just didn't use the term back then. But what I loved about looking at Henry Ford was he truly had this reality distortion field before Steve did. And I'm convinced that maybe Steve had a little bit of this injected into him when he was at Apple. Ford was known for, and does this sound familiar to you on some of the visionaries you know, as well as the one that I've outlined in the book? Ford was known for his unwavering determination, his visionary thinking, and the ability to shape circumstances to align with his objectives, using the RDF in all but name. It wasn't around then. It was around when Steve was there and when Henry Ford was doing these unbelievably great concepts that would turn into commercialized products. Nobody knew about it then either. So let me give you a little bit of background on Henry Ford. He was born in 1863 on a farm near Dearborn, Michigan. He showed a really early interest in machinery and mechanics. And you'll find that with a lot of visionaries is they were tinkering a lot at a young age. And what they were looking for was to develop that passion in them, to make things better, to make things different, to have an impact on our world. And he founded the Detroit Automobile Company in 1899, then left and founded Ford Motor Company in 1903. And this was a huge move for him, one that would have foundered Ford had not possessed the commitment to shape reality to his vision. He was building a new world where mass-produced cars were an indispensable part of everyday life. So a huge move for him. He could have just stayed at Detroit Automobile Company where he was founded, but he decided to make this move because he wanted to do something different. At the time when cars were considered impractical luxury items, Ford envisioned a reality where automobiles were practical and affordable for the average person. Now remember, this is back in the day when cars were first coming out, and they were impractical, and that's why they mentioned there's no market for it. Only the rich can afford it. So at the time when cars were considered impractical luxury items, Ford envisioned a reality where automobiles were practical for the everyday person. Any family can afford it. So by challenging the existing reality of the auto industry, he played a truly pivotal role in revolutionizing it. That distinction matters for every leader in this room. Anybody listening to this podcast, because every one of you will face a moment where the gap between where you are and where you're going is so large that rational people will say it can't be done. In that moment, you as a leader, the question is, do you accept reality as it is, or do you lead from the reality you're building? That's a huge question and a crossroads for any leader to achieve that vision of where they want to take their brand, company, product, or service. So, insight number one is the method. How Ford applied this reality distortion field. Ford's use of the reality distortion field can be seen most clearly in 4 specific behaviors. These are the same behaviors that define every visionary leader who's ever bent reality with integrity. One is that they reframe the challenges. Ford didn't see obstacles as roadblocks. He saw them as innovation opportunities, and you need to do the same. When engineers said mass production was impossible, there's no way you can do it, Ford reframed the challenge. Not can we build this, but how do we build this faster, cheaper, and better than anyone thought possible? So what he was doing was flipping the challenge back to those that had to implement it. Presenting the challenge to them, not just demanding that something be done, but challenging them to make something better, make something more efficient, more effective. If you're just asking the same questions, you get the status quo. And that's my next point. Questioning the status quo is integral. At every turn, Ford challenged conventional thinking. Cars are for the rich. Ford said, not for long. Factories were disorganized. Ford said, watch what happens when we standardize every part and every motion. The prevailing wisdom at the time was fragmented manufacturing was inevitable. And Ford looked at it in a different context. We'll own the entire supply chain. That was unheard of at the time. You were getting parts from all over the place, and really nothing came together as a cohesive, let's say, engine. Ford changed that. The third is genuine conviction behind what you're looking to achieve. Many people cop out too early, and that was never in Henry Ford's DNA nor Steve Jobs' DNA. Ford's belief in his vision was not performance. It was real, and his teams felt it. He set goals that at the time appeared a distortion of reality. The Model T, the moving assembly line, the $5 a day wage, and they're going to say $5 a day wage. But back in the day, it was $2. Think about that. So somebody's getting paid $30 a day. All of a sudden, you walk into the factory floor and you say, I'm going to pay you $80 an hour. Effectively, it's the same thing, 30 to 80. So each was considered impossible. Ford's conviction turned them into milestones. And the next is introduce some fresh perspectives. The 8-cylinder, and you probably haven't heard this story, but the 8-cylinder engine did not exist before Henry Ford decided to make it exist. Ford's famous RDF moment, conventional automotive engineers dismissed the 8-cylinder engine as impossible. Ford was adamant. And that is where this famous quote came up to these engineers from Henry Ford. His quote said it all at the time. Think you can, think you can't. Either way, you're right. You figure it out. Conventional minds thought they could build it, couldn't build it, so they couldn't. Think you can, think you can't. Conventional minds at the time thought they couldn't build it, so as a result, they told Henry Ford they couldn't. Ford thought he could, so he did. And as a result, history was made. Think about that. Everything at the time was 4-cylinder engines. Henry Ford wanted more power, so he asked for the 8-cylinder engine. Can you imagine something that hasn't actually been made to have engineers created from scratch? That's truly visionary and happens very infrequently in our lifetime. Ford didn't personally design the engine, but he created the environment where his engineering team felt inspired and motivated to develop something the rest of the the industry said was impossible. That's truly RDF at work. Not the leader doing everything, the leader creating conditions where everything becomes possible. And that was the magic of Steve Jobs, was the ability to create the environment, the challenges. If it was easy, anybody can do it. And that's always the thing that I get in writing the book about Steve. In the book about Steve, in the chapter I have on him, is the misconception that people had that he was so hard on people. He was a jerk. But at the end of the day, you look at his accomplishments, and at the end of the day, if you interview those that were part of that process and part of his reality distortion field, bringing that vision to reality, and if you were a part of it, you never, ever, ever forgot about it. And think of all the movies, the books, everything that has been written about Steve's accomplishments done through the RDF. So Ford's founding of the Ford Motor Company was really a gamble. He had already left one automotive company. He was starting another with investors who had every reason to doubt him. But Ford's conviction, and this is where your conviction needs to come from as well as a leader, in something that leaders miss. The RDF only works if you are generally willing to live in the reality that you're projecting to those who are part of your team. You cannot lead from a vision you are secretly afraid of creating. Ford's risk-taking was not reckless, it was strategic. He pursued vertical integration, owning rubber plantations, iron ore mines, entire supply chains. Think of the balls that takes at the time when nothing was integrated, because he understood that control over the process was the only way to control the outcome. He doubled workers' wages, not out of generosity, but out of market logic. Workers who can't afford the product don't expand the market. The $5 a wage was both a social and commercial innovation. So here's a practical application for you when you look at the RDF and examples that I've outlined with Henry Ford. Number one, ask yourself, what are you accepting? Where are you accepting risk limitations that your competitors have questions? And number two is, are you building ownership over the critical inputs to your vision? The supply chain in Henry Ford's case. And number three is your team rewarded in a way that makes them genuinely invested in the outcome? Do you empower them to make decisions? Are you humble enough to give credit? All of these things are important to executing your vision through RDF. And insight number three is the line. Make sure that you always use RDF with integrity. And I get that question a lot of times when I whiteboard this with CEOs and executives of brands and companies. Is, oh, that's just something that you're manipulating people. Well, it's really not a manipulation when you bring it to reality. So the lesson here is the same from chapter 6 of the Visionary Leader. The RDF is not permission to distort the truth. It is permission and the responsibility to lead from the future instead of the present. Where Henry Ford applied the RDF with integrity, he made a credible plan, not just a compelling vision. His assembly line innovation was real. It produced measurable results in products. His wage policy created genuine conditions for a market expansion across all products. His vertical integration gave him actual control over quality and cost, more efficiency, more effective. Think about that today with AI. As I talk about that all the time with the executives are concerned about the impact of AI. Where do I implement it? How do I apply it? Where do I get the ROI? The vertical integration, think about this statement, gave him control over quality and cost, which translates back to how he could afford the $5 wage. That's the beauty of it. He knew that if he was 40% more efficient, he could afford to give back, stay on the same gross margin, with producing more revenue at the same cost level outside of wages. So he was able to give back to those that were part of that process in executing the RDF and the vision that he had for the assembly line. The moment the RDF crosses into manipulation is when inspiration is not backed by execution. Ford's lasting legacy was built because the reality he distorted eventually became actual reality. That is the test. Not how inspiring this vision is, but whether it becomes real. And that's what I talk about a lot of times in our whiteboard meetings with CEOs and executives at Liquid Mind, again, is how do we implement RDF? How do I get people to believe in my vision? Well, it's authentication, it's trust, and it's actual commercialization. So the practical application of this, I'm going to give you 3 questions. If you could write these down. If you can't, you can go back to the podcast and listen to this again. But number 1 is there a credible execution path behind your vision or just conviction? Number two is, are you building the infrastructure required to support the future you're promising? And this is a great example of what happened with electric cars, at least so far. As I always say, the chicken before the egg, right? And when I look at Ford, and I had a profile on this on my previous podcast about the failure of Ford Company. And it's interesting that I'm looking at this dichotomy of Henry Ford's success and Farley's failure at Ford with electric vehicles is he had no infrastructure. He's basically trying to create the egg before the chicken. You need to have the chicken before you can have the egg. So build the infrastructure first. And the trust level with your consumer second. The cars will come later through demand. There was no demand for something that had no infrastructure to it. So this again is the credibility issue with Ford today. Not Henry Ford, but the current leadership of Ford, which is frustrating. So again, are you building the infrastructure required to support the future you're promising? If you're going to build electric cars, Ford, you better darn well have some infrastructure to charge them. They didn't have it. As a result, they had a $4 or $5 billion write-off last quarter. So is your team, and the third is your team inspired or performing inspiration because they're afraid to push back? So then insight number 4 is the legacy. What Ford built beyond the car? What was his legacy? Ford's legacy is one of continuous innovation. By consistently introducing new ideas and technologies, he created a reality where Ford Motor Company was really synonymous with automotive innovation. But the legacy goes further than the company. Ford's vision left a lasting impact across multiple areas and domains in the industry. Number 1 is industrial manufacturing. The moving assembly line became the global standard. Think about that. That wasn't in place before Henry Ford. Number 2 is the American culture. The automobile transformed from luxury to necessity. Number 3 is labor practices. He wanted to reward his employees through better efficiencies through industrial manufacturing and the assembly line. The $5 wage reshaped the employee-workforce relationship. Again, think about that. Somebody walking into your office and you're making $30 an hour, whatever it happens to be, let's say as an example, and they say, we're going to pay you $80 an hour. Think of the impact that has on the economy, your lifestyle, and you in your credibility with who you work with. Number 4 is the global markets. Manufacturing plants across multiple countries created the first global automotive brand. And the last is through his successes, philanthropy. The Ford Foundation, established in 1936, became one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. So he was giving back as well. This is what the RDF looks like at scale and at legacy. Not just building a product, building a new world that outlasts the builder. So you ask yourself these questions in a practical application. 3 questions. Are you creating a culture where the team believes in what's possible beyond your presence? Number 2 is, are you building leaders who will carry the vision when you're no longer in the room? Number 3 is your narrative compelling enough to survive your absence? So ask those 3 questions and you'll understand what your legacy looks like when you're gone. And some of Ford's key accomplishments, just to give you an idea of what he accomplished over his lifetime. Model T, 1908, introduced the first automobile widely accessible to the American middle class. Affordability, durability, and simplicity revolutionized the automotive market. Number 2, the assembly line, which is a standard in every industry today, from defense to consumer electronics to commercial avionics, whatever it is. It's a standard in the industry. reduced production time per car from over 12, think about this, from 12 hours to approximately 90 minutes. He set the global template for modern manufacturing. Standardization and interchangeable parts. He reduced manufacturing complexity, made repairs affordable, and enabled the assembly line efficiency. $5 wages, vertical integration, global expansion, the Ford Foundation. All of these things, part of his legacy. So, what are these visionary characteristics? What made Ford an RDF leader? Ford's central visionary characteristics define the RDF applied with integrity. The willingness to innovate. He never accepted the current state of manufacturing as the final state. Number 2 is audacious, huge goal setting. Every milestone was considered impossible before he made it inevitable. Number 3 is risk-taking. I've said you've never seen one product ever created without taking risk and failure. Not one. He left one company, founded another, and staked everything on a vision that the market hadn't asked for yet. Uncompromising efficiency, far-reaching market vision. These are characteristics of every visionary leader who has ever used the RDF, Reality Distortion Field. Not to deceive, but to build what didn't exist yet. That's the difference. And I get this from people where they go, oh, RDF again. I mentioned it earlier, where they had said, oh, it's deception. Remember, these are the characteristics of every visionary leader who has ever used Reality Distortion Field. Remember this, not to deceive, but to build what didn't exist yet. So let me give you some final thoughts and a closing challenge. Ford's quote bears repeating one more time. Think you can, think you can't. Either way, you're right. That is the Reality Distortion Field in its most essential form. Not a management technique, not a communication strategy, a fundamental choice about relationship between belief and reality. Ford didn't accept the world as it was, and you shouldn't either. He led from the world he was building, and he built his teams, his systems, his supply chains to serve that future, not the present. Here's your challenge this week. Identify one area of your business where conventional thinking is holding you back. And I know you have it. One assumption about your market, your product, your team, your process, that everyone is accepted as fixed and it can't be changed. Call bullshit on it. Make a change. Then ask this question. What if that assumption is wrong? Very simple question. What becomes possible if we ignore that limitation? Who on my team would rise to the challenge if I gave them the conviction to try? I empower them. That's how Ford built the automotive industry. That's how you start bending reality. Transform, reinvent, revolutionize. That's not a tagline. That's the operating principle of every visionary leader who has ever used the Reality Distortion Field to build something that changed the world. And if this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to pick up a copy of The Visionary Leader, The Success Principles of the World's Greatest Visionaries. It's available now at Amazon. Wherever books are sold, the book draws directly from the frameworks we discuss in the show and in today. It's your blueprint for building the kind of leadership that creates generational impact. I'll put the link in the show notes. And if you're a CMO, a founder, brand leader, you'd like to apply these frameworks directly to your business, I work with a select number of clients on a private advisory basis through Liquid Mind. And if that's you, visit liquidmindsight.com/contact. Reach out to me and my team, and we'll be able to set up a meeting to get an idea of where you're at in your current visionary strategy and things that you need to implement. And that'll also be in the show notes. And one quick ask before I let you go is if this episode gave you one idea you can use this week, would you take 30 seconds to leave a review on Apple Podcasts? It would be so appreciated. And my main goal here, just so you know, people will ask me this as well, but my main goal here is to extend the reach because I feel there's so many people that reach out to me that benefit, fortunately, benefit from what I'm providing to you that I want it to reach more people, and that can only be done through you. So it'd be greatly appreciated. It basically tells the algorithm this show is worth finding. And it helps other leaders discover the content. Search the Visionary Chronicles, scroll to ratings and a review, and just leave an honest review. I read every one of them, and it's always appreciated, and I thank you for doing this. And for weekly brand strategy and leadership insights I don't share anywhere else, subscribe to the Visionary Advisory Letter at bryansmeltzer.com, BRYAN. SMELTZER.com. The link is in the show notes. And the Visionary Chronicles, where the future is created by those bold enough to shape it. Until next time, keep innovating, keep leading, and keep shaping the future. Stay true, stay authentic, be different, and be great. Most of all, enjoy the journey along the way. I'm Bryan Smeltzer. See you in the next Chronicle.